Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Many significant events these last weeks. Of course, we've watched very closely the Bush tax cut deal. That will continue through the weekend, but we have good reason to believe that the Senate will now find closure as early as Monday on the Senate side of the Bush tax cut deal. The House side, of course, will continue as melodrama until Mrs. Pelosi, returning from the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, corrals her vast majority and delivers to her president the Bush tax cut deal. Another significant achievement last week, hard to notice with all of the yelling at the White House, was the announcement by the Obama administration that it will cease pressing Israel on the very delicate issue of so-called settlement building. Settlements are on the West Bank. The Jerusalem building is not settlements. It's not about settlements. However, it has been part of the debate between the Obama administration and the Netanyahu cabinet and government. These last months, the Obama administration is said to have dropped it. What does that mean? Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations, joins me. Malcolm, dropped the settlements. What does that mean?
Well, I think this is a significant development, and it was a decision reached by the administration after consultation with the Israelis and Palestinians, and they went to great lengths to try to indicate that this was a result of a process. It wasn't even a lateral decision, and also not to ascribe blame. And in fact, it seems that there were a number of factors. One that we had discussed was that Israel had asked in writing for the offer that Secretary Clinton regarding the F-35s and other things, and it seems the administration was unwilling to do it. And whether there was a split there is unclear. Second, I think they realized that the Palestinians were never going to come across with anything less than their total demand, which the United States felt was unrealistic as well, and that this pressure on this one point about a moratorium, which was initiated initially by the president, who talked about this, quote, settlement freeze, although it had never been the case before. I think they realized that this was a dead end. Netanyahu and they had negotiated. They said that it was very cordial and positive, but they didn't reach an agreement. But most of all, I think the one thing they did concur was that the Palestinians were never going to come around and were not going to make this a fruitful approach. And so they switched to talks at the end of, immediately almost, where Mocho from Israel and Erekat from the Palestinians were in Washington, began discussions, and the United States is now saying we're going to focus on the substantive issues, which are security and borders.
For some time, Malcolm, you've made it clear in your reporting that Mahmoud Abbas, Saeb Erekat, the chief Palestinian negotiator, have been seeking to slow down and sabotage these direct talks. They did not want to go forward because it presents them to the Arab world as collusional with Israel, and that is antithetical to their raising money and remaining as strong on the West Bank. However, it also suits their narrative that they cannot get justice from the United States, they cannot get justice from Israel. Therefore, the United Nations General Assembly, or parts of it, must declare unilaterally the so-called 67 borders. Last week, there was a report that Brazil's foreign minister is ready to go forward with that. Other states have voiced it. What is the status of the Palestinian trick to have the borders imposed without a peace treaty?
Well, first, I think you're touching on a very important point, and that is that Abbas, many people believe, is constitutionally incapable and unwilling really to enter into negotiations, and that is why he has avoided any discussion of substantive talks, despite the fact that Netanyahu was prepared to do so and had a 10-month freeze, and they waited till 9.5 months into it to begin talks, knowing that it would put the pressure on him. And secondly, I think one of the precipitating factors had to be the meeting of the Fatah Revolutionary Council, where after all that the United States did to promote this process, they took a vote and they said, we will not have any talks until every single house is stopped, meaning no construction whatsoever anywhere. Two, that we will not compromise on Jerusalem, we will not compromise on borders, we will not engage in any land swap, which was a fundamental principle of the Bush and the Obama administration. So I think that meeting of this authoritative body, the Fatah Revolutionary Council, was really the death knell that signaled to the administration they weren't going anywhere with these talks. Then you raised I think the most significant development in the aftermath, but it actually preceded the decision of the administration in terms of Brazil, where Lula the president, De Silva, announced that he was going to recognize a Palestinian state in the 67 borders. That was followed then the next day by Argentina and Uruguay, and now Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Cuba, all of the ones in the Chavista coalition, those allied with Chavez of Venezuela. And their declarations later didn't even mention 67. It is a preemptive move. And I believe that it goes to what we talked about before, John, and that is presaging a move at the United Nations, where the non-aligned movement has an automatic majority, and instead of coming from the Arab League, it will come then from this group of South American countries. And while it doesn't have full legal status, a decision of the General Assembly, and it can't declare a country a state, a member state, but it will have moral suasion. Now, the other thing that I learned this week is that the next president of the NAM is your favorite country. So you know it's going to take a really positive direction as Iran assumes the chairmanship of the non-aligned movement.
That's a great breakthrough for Iran.
Yes. And it's not been in the papers and it's not reported, but I heard this from one of the people inside the NAM.
So everybody wants to make
they are
trouble.
likely, but you know that there's G77, which is 130 countries. Venezuela was to be the chairman, and the last day they switched it to Argentina. They turned it over because Argentina today is almost a puppet of Chavez on the political realm.
You know, I stumbled across the fact that Argentina is loudly suspect, as money laundering for drug cartels.
Oh, really?
You're kidding. Argentina is leaning towards rogue statehood these days. Has anybody noticed that? Is it, we talk about Buenos Aires as a free fire zone for partying, but has anybody noticed that Argentina is just, the economy's broken, the Kushneers have disgraced themselves in the Western Hemisphere.
One died.
And now they're for sale.
And you remember that the person who was caught carrying $6 million to them from Chavez for their election campaign in cash.
You're getting me off my narrative here, Malcolm. But back to Iran and the United Nations Security Council. We'll deal with Buenos Aires another day. The United Nations Security Council, P5+1, plus the European Union's state representative, Catherine Ashton, yes, met in Geneva for 2 days earlier this week. They continued their talks for Istanbul in a month's time. At this point, the reporting I did, I talked to Stephen Erlanger of the New York Times bureau chief, who was in Geneva, is that the talks resulted in more talks, no substance whatsoever. The United Nations is playing the game. Why?
First of all, because it's part of a pattern that has gone on for 20 years where we keep in vain hope of some progress. I think that many of them believe that Iran's willingness to appear at the meeting is a sign that the sanctions are working. I think second, their hope was at most to be able to get to the next round, as you pointed out, in Turkey. No one had really high hopes. What I think they did present, the West presented a tougher sanctions regime with more demands in terms of the amount of uranium, because they've had all this time to add to the enrichment. And I know you discussed the fact that they now have, 70 pounds at 20%, and which they had 0 a year ago.
Right.
So
and unknown at a higher rate.
But this is a vain hope. We know that this is just a bottomless pit. There is no real way to reach an agreement or an achievement in this.
Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. Iran continued the talks in January in Istanbul. The states in South America looking to impose so-called 67 borders without peace negotiations in the Middle East. And most importantly, the United States will no longer encourage the Israeli cabinet to make concessions on settlements. Abbas has left the table. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.